The paragraphs that I chose for this presentation all come from the philosophical portion of my paper. After I go through the majority of my narrative, I jump into basically just talking about moral philosophy and 17th century political doctrines. Now I chose these paragraphs because I enjoyed writing them the most. It was just a lot of fun to play around with all these different ideas and concepts and see how I could fit them together. It was probably also the most difficult portion of my writing. It's probably blocked for a couple of days just because I didn't know where to begin because there's so much. And this is the passage. It is an inarguable fact that the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas is an artistic and cultural tragedy. It was the result of one group's vehement beliefs that they are wise to the correct method of living, and thus they proceed to erase representations of all other lifestyles and beliefs. This sense of moral superiority is not something contrary to human nature. In fact, belief in the superiority of our way of life is essential to our peace of mind. After all, one does not like to feel inferior in any regards, much less with respect to the fundamental behaviors of their daily lives. As part of moral self-righteousness, most people are champions of moral absolutism, wherein all actions are intrinsically right or wrong. However, issues of ethical self-righteousness and contentions between groups arise because not everyone believes actions have the same intrinsic value, and yet they all believe unwaveringly in the value that they have assigned to said action. For instance, that I have said, quote, "It is an inarguable fact that the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas is an artistic and cultural tragedy," end quote, reveals my belief, if I were a moral absolutist, that the destruction of the Buddhas was intrinsically bad. However, the Taliban, the ones who destroyed the statues, would have believed that the destruction was necessary for people to live better lives, and thus of intrinsically good value. People never do something because they believe they're in the wrong. So why do so many people tolerate violence and destruction when logic would tell us it's dangerous and wrong? The answer rests in how we've developed the doctrines by which we live, or rather, haven't developed them. For most people in modern Western societies, ethical doctrine and behavioral truths are given, likely by either a religion or an individual. Rarely do people consider what would be important to them if they had to build a system of moral behaviors without guidance. Much of what we believe about the proper way to live in modern society stems from the 17th century philosophers Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and common conceptions of human nature. Human nature is a perpetual question. Having already determined that people do not do things that they believe is inherently wrong, leaves the question, why do people do bad things? The English philosopher and antecedent of the Age of Enlightenment, Thomas Hobbes, would say that people do bad things because they are inherently selfish and violently intent on self-preservation. Hobbes believes that morality was a construct of the sovereign, who was the moral authority. He spent a good deal of time developing a hypothetical situation, which he calls the state of nature, and utilizing it as a backdrop to plainly describe and understand true human nature. In this state of nature, every human is at war with every other human on Earth because nothing belongs to anybody, and, at the same time, everything belongs to everybody. Individuals are constantly competing for everything, thus the state of nature is a state of war. Now this becomes relevant to modern society and political doctrine in that, according to Thomas Hobbes, the only way to escape this state is to form a social contract wherein a sovereign enforces law and justice between individuals, thus keeping them in a state of peace. It is this concept of a social construct to enforce the way we live that is so prevalent in modern society. Hobbes believed that the role of government is to keep peace, and thus it should be obeyed absolutely. Hobbes built the foundation for societal contract theory, which has since been rehashed by a number of subsequent philosophers, most notably and influential being John Locke. Locke was slightly less than half a century younger than Hobbes and is arguably the first true Enlightenment era thinker. Locke's theories from his two treatises on government are visible throughout modern political organizations and thought, and still he shapes Western political practices. John Locke holds a very different view of the state of nature compared to Hobbes. Unlike Hobbes, Locke believed that there was a natural law And when a social contract was made, it is the government's sole responsibility to uphold this code of law. Natural law, as Locke conceives it, consists of three unalienable rights that all humans have: life, liberty, and property. For Locke, humans are entitled to self-ownership, autonomy, and the fruits of their own labor. Though Locke didn't believe in the same dog-eat-dog state of nature that Hobbes did, he did recognize that there are individuals that will do terrible things for their own self-interest, and thus, the social contract is necessary, as any law that isn't enforced becomes meaningless. The most radical aspect of Locke's doctrines was the belief that if government was failing its responsibility to its citizens, the people then have the responsibility to change or outright remove the government. Our lives are shaped by these beliefs and theories, as every doctrine that has followed Thomas Hobbes and John Locke shares ideas with or responds to these two massively influential thinkers. Though, remember, these are doctrines that we in modern society are given, pulled from birth. That doesn't mean that they're absolutely the right way to live. Yet, we take them for granted, thoughtlessly listening as Western culture mutters her 17th century mantras.